Avast, ye filthy landlubbers, 'tis your old pal Captain Thunderwing here, with a tale to shiver your timbers to their very core. A tale of hydro and thunder. Now listen up, ye bilge-sucking son of a biscuit-eater, and prepare to batten down the hatches, lest I have ye keel-hauled under me ship, the Cutthroat. Now, if you're sitting comfortable like, we can begin this here retro review of the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder series and its spiritual successor, Yarr! If the arcade racer is gradually changing from a mainstream of popular culture from the past to a niche gaming genre enjoyed by only a few older gamers like myself and a handful of younger gamers with an interest in all things retro, then the aquatic racer must be seen as perhaps the nichest of niche branches of the genre as a whole. Which is a shame, because there are some really excellent powerboat and jet ski based racers out there, and the undisputed king of the aquatic racing genre, well, in my opinion that is, has got to be the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder series. Hold on a second, that didn't sound nearly Hydrooooo Thuundery enough. Let's try that again. It's got to be the
Hydrooooo Thuuuunder
series. Now, in my last couple of retro reviews, my experiences with the games that I talked about were quite closely tied in with my earliest experiences of the particular consoles that they were on. And you know, it's funny because I'd never really given it all that much thought before, but I realised when I was talking about my experiences with 32-bit gaming in those other videos that both my Sega Saturn and PlayStation were impulse purchases. I hadn't gone out to the game store to intentionally pick up a new console. It just kinda happened that the stars were in perfect alignment that day that led to me finding each machine for a price I was willing to cough up for. Such was the case with the Sega Dreamcast too. I've been eyeing up Sega's new 128-bit console for a bit after it was first launched, but I didn't have any definitive plans to purchase one. Around this time, you see, I decided I was going to go and work in Australia for a year, so really a frivolous purchase of something like a new console should have been pretty low on my list of spending priorities. Well, that was supposed to be the plan at any rate. However, a random visit to an electronics boutique store with my mate Andy one afternoon, on the way back from watching the Guy Ritchie film Snatch at the cinema, which means I can pin the year down as being 2000, soon put paid to that idea. Despite the incredible technical step up the Dreamcast represented over the previous generation of consoles and the very attractive price it was going for, unfortunately it was struggling to make a dent in the console market at this point in time, and it looked like it was going to be suffering the same fate as a Saturn, with a life cycle that looked very sadly like it was going to be prematurely cut short. And this was starting to be reflected in the price that you could purchase them for. I mentioned in my Ridge Racer Type 4 retro review that Resident Evil 2 was the biggest selling point of the PS1 for me, and it just so happened that the Dreamcast had got its own exclusive Resident Evil game, Code Veronica, which I was more than a little bit keen to play, even though I knew the console was probably doomed to failure. I'd seen a review of it on the telly on some late night gaming show, and all the 128-bit jiggery pokery that was packed into its 2 GD-ROMs made the game look absolutely amazing, with incredibly smooth and detailed looking character models, which was such a huge step up from the old 32-bit game's blocky pixelated looking ones, and also proper 3D rendered backgrounds. And it just so happened that on the day I found myself in EB after the cinema, they were selling a very reasonably priced Dreamcast bundle that included Resident Evil Code Veronica, along with Dead or Alive 2, Choo Choo Rocket and one of the Tomb Raiders. I knew I was supposed to be saving for Australia, but god damn it, I just couldn't help myself. And after a bit of further cajoling from Andy, who kept saying to me, do it, I ended up relenting and making an impulse purchase. Now, a few days prior to this, I'd read a review, which I think was on the old Teletext service Digitizer, all about a powerboat racing game called Hydrooooo Thuuuunder. It was an arcade game developed by Midway that I'd never seen in the arcade, or in fact I'd even ever heard of before the Digitizer review. But with the words of Mr. Biffo, or possibly he might have been Mr. Hares, still ringing around in my brain, mentioning it was an absolutely fantastic arcade racer, I decided to pick up a copy of the game with the Dreamcast. And oh boy, it certainly didn't disappoint. Coming off the back of the PS1 and Saturn era as I was, once I'd got the console back from the shop and hooked up to my TV, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder's arcade quality, bright and colourful visuals absolutely blew both me and Andy away. The larger-than-life presentation of the game also made an impression as well, from the incredibly enthusiastic voiceover guy from the title and stage select screen, who likes to shout that you're crazy if you select one of the hard boats, to the amusing comments you get from your co-pilot during gameplay, and wacky stages on top of a solid 2-player mode. Unfortunately, the game played every bit as good as it looked. The graphics truly were a wow factor though. Up until this point in time, I'd never actually played a racing game at home that looked this good before. The jump in graphical quality in this game compared to my PS1 was just absolutely staggering, and at the time it felt like the closest thing to having an actual arcade game in my bedroom. I think it still looks great by today's standards. For some reason, the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder arcade game is something that you still can't play in emulation. So to this day, I still have no idea how the Dreamcast version actually compares graphically to the arcade original. Actually, saying no idea is a little bit of an exaggeration. I have seen some video footage of it running on YouTube. From what I can see, it does look very similar to the arcade game. It's just hard to tell from an externally recorded video just exactly how close it is compared to actually eyeballing the cabinet yourself. It looks bloody awesome here though on the game's original old school CRT monitor. One of the things I love about Hydrooooo Thuuuunder so much is that it truly embraces the fantastical, larger-than-life style that you used to get in so many arcade games back in the 1990s. Each of the levels is very distinct and memorable, with lots of crazy stuff going on. From the meteorite-stricken, post-apocalyptic sunken metropolis of New York disaster, to the stormy seas and rusted-out old hulks of old ships and crashed underwater plains of ship graveyard. You've got the picturesque vistas of Lost Island with its smoking volcano that we saw earlier, the Asian culture at the Far East, the classical architecture of the Greek Isles, the frozen tundra of the Arctic Circle, complete with some modern day pirates. You can go for a lovely journey through the moonlit canals of Venice. And if you're after even more excitement, Lake Powell has an impressive and insanely high jump at the end. And then you've got the all-out batshit craziness of Nile Adventure, one of 4 bonus stages you can unlock. Nile Adventure is probably my favourite track in the whole game. As a kid, I was always fascinated by the mysteries of ancient Egypt and the pyramids, which I think in part was because of the fact I was absolutely terrified by the idea of ancient Egyptian mummies. And I really dig the idea here that the Nile or one of its tributaries actually goes underneath and through one of the pyramids. And inside that pyramid there's some absolutely mad shit going on, including a giant one-eyed monster that shoots laser beams at you, a freaky rotating tunnel, and a giant serpent that slithers through the walls of the stage. As I mentioned earlier, I think the game still looks pretty great today. The water effects in particular have always impressed me, especially the way in some parts of the stages the water will sometimes become opaque, letting you see all the structures and scenery details underneath you, like on Greek Isles when you go through this temple, and all the derelict cars you can see under the water on New York Disaster. You've also got to just love the thought and imagination that went into each of these levels, and they're a far cry from the dull realistic circuits you get in modern racing sims. These crazy tracks almost feel like you're on some kind of a theme park ride. I love the fact as well that quite often a lot of the stages will have some kind of an NPC boat that gets in your way, normally with some accompanying sampled speech, like the Lost Island Tours boat. the pirates on Arctic Circle, and various police and security boats on some of the other stages.
Time running low. Time extended.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lost on Our Tours.
Time extended.
There are so many things on the tracks you can interact with as well, like the cheeky little monkey you can knock off the bridge here, and the penguins that you can run over on Arctic Circle, which I always feel a little bit guilty about afterwards. And on Lake Powell, there's a helicopter you can smash out of the air. And if you get your jump just right at the end of the stage, you can smash into the train and knock its carriages off the bridge. If the arc of your jump is a little bit lower, there's also another helicopter you can smash out of the air, so good times. Just like the CPU racers, you can normally mighty hull the NPC boat out of the way. What is the mighty hull, you say? Well, I'll come on to that in just a second. Most of these theme park style stages are normally completed in one lap and have normally got various shortcuts dotted around them, which you can normally access by doing things like driving through waterfalls or boost jumping over obstacles.
Time extended.
These normally open up new areas of the track, which will ultimately shave seconds off your total lap times. As well as the one-lap races, there are a couple of others though, like Hydro Speedway and Thunder Park, that are more like aquatic racetracks and take 3 laps to complete. Scattered across the tracks are blue and red boost icons, which when collected allow the player to boost the ship's speed for a limited amount of time, which allows a player's boat to reach speeds much higher than what would normally be possible. Red icons give more boost fuel than blue. Boosting also activates the mighty hull, which allows you to smash the other boats out the way and send them flying into the air. A very handy feature for when the CPU boats are jostling with you for position in the game and just generally getting in your way. Eat mighty hull, biatch. I love being able to do that. Another aspect of boosting is the hydro jump, which is performed by braking and then immediately pressing the boost button straight afterwards, providing you have fuel in the tank. When combined with the many ramps on the tracks, doing this allows you to reach shortcuts and boost icons that would not normally be accessible otherwise. The boats in Hydrooooo Thuuuunder are divided into 4 categories: easy, medium, hard and bonus. The easy boats tend to be easy to control but are slow. Hard boats are usually very fast but difficult to control, and the medium boats, as you'd expect, sit in between. The bonus boats are pretty wacky and include a miniature version of the Titanic and a rocket-powered fishing boat with a dog that barks at the opposition boats, along with a hovercraft and an armed response unit. Some of the boats seem to be better suited to jumping higher and are better at air control than others. All the boats are very individual looking and each have a bit of backstory, such as Misbehave, a beginner level boat built from reclaimed parts salvaged from a World War II aircraft, to Rad Hazard, one of the expert ones, which was allegedly created with scrap UFO parts from Area 51. Once you collect your first boost icon, the boosters on each boat come to life with an accompanying animation. If your booster completely runs out, the boosters themselves will deactivate and you'll get another animation as they shut down. Not to worry though, as soon as you go through another boost pod they will reactivate. The This does mean you do need to try and play tactically though, to try and avoid that slight delay that you get as the boosters reactivate if you let your tank get completely empty. The handling can differ a fair bit between the boats, even those in the same class as one another. Some, for example, might have decent cornering and stability, but a slow boost activation time and overall lower top speed. In the expert class, Rad Hazard has got very heavy steering combined with slippery handling, as it seems to skim over the water. But it's got a fast mighty hull activation time and goes like the absolute clappers. Cutthroat, also in the expert class, has fast mighty hull activation time and is particularly great in the air, but is extremely light and easily jostled and tossed around by the other boats because of the fact that it is so light. Razorback is among the fastest boats in the game, but is arguably the most difficult to control because its centre of gravity is at the rear, leading to abysmal stability in the water, with it feeling like it's jumping all over the track. It's an absolute nightmare to control. But having said that, it's still not as much of a pain in the arse to control as this next boat. If you can even really call it a boat, that is. Blowfish, the bonus hovercraft, is probably faster still than Razorback, but is incredibly slippery, more so than even Rad Hazard, as there is practically no friction between the vehicle's cushion and the water. And if you're not careful, you can end up severely oversteering with it and facing the wrong way on the track. You'll tend to find which boat works best for you as you play through it. And I think it's pretty safe to say that Blowfish and Razorback are definitely not those boats for me. The water that you're racing on in the tracks also behaves dynamically and affect how your boats behave, with some stages offering races on very flat, calm surfaces, to sections that are like proper, choppy, full-on stormy seas, complete with massive waves that can throw you up in the air, which can severely hamper the handling of your boat. Tidal Blade and Thresher are my usual go-to vehicles, but if I have to try and tackle a course with a hard one, I'll normally go for Cutthroat. You start off with just 3 easy level boats and tracks, and the additional boats and stages are unlocked as you play through the game and get first place on the subsequent stages. The tracks in Hydrooooo Thuuuunder, like the boats, are divided into 4 classes: easy, medium, hard and bonus. The layout of the stages on the arcade version of the game was slightly different to the Dreamcast version, with 4 easy stages and only 2 medium and expert courses and 2 bonus stages. Greek Isles got bumped up to a medium track in the home version. New York Disaster and Nile Adventure were the 2 bonus stages in the arcade. Hydrooooo Speedway was apparently present as a hidden track in the arcade as well. The home ports added 2 new bonus stages, Catacomb and Castle Von Dandy. So with New York Disaster now becoming one of the expert stages and Hydrooooo Speedway getting added to the bonus roster, that now makes 4 bonus stages in total. I love the fact that when you pick one of the expert level tracks, the game actually says experts only and a warning klaxon sounds, complete with a pillar of flame appearing behind the word hard. It's just yet another nice touch in a game that's full of them.
Experts only!
A prototype version of Hydrooooo Thuuunder for the Dreamcast from 1999 materialised on the internet at some point, which is something I was totally unaware of until I started looking up some further info about the game for this video. I'm going to talk about the prototype a little bit more further on in the video, but I just wanted to bring it up here, on the topic of the stages in the game, because it also included an additional 14th stage, which you can find in amongst the easy tracks, called Trainer, which I believe you can also find in the regular retail version of the game too, with a bit of ROM hackery, hexedity type shenanigans. It's interesting to see this unused stage, as it's got graphical assets in it that you don't encounter anywhere else in the game. As the name suggests, it's a literal trainer, with sections of track that seem to be specifically designed to test things out, like your ability to boost, to do the hydro jump, to slalom, and to successfully navigate ramps. and no CPU boats or timer. At the end of the stage, you get flung down a very large ramp, and it feels like you get transported into one of those training type sims from the Matrix. Complete with some choppy water and boats for you to try crashing into, which is pretty cool in a Alice Through the Looking Glass kind of way. As well as the Dreamcast, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder was also released for the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and was also available for the PC, with the N64 game being the only version that offered a 4-player split-screen mode, as opposed to the Dreamcast and PS1's 2-player mode. It's also been included in some midway compilations in later years for consoles like the OG Xbox and GameCube. As well as the Dreamcast, in more recent years I also played through the PC version of the game too. The final 4 bonus tracks were unlocked in a different order on the PC compared to the Dreamcast. The first bonus track you encountered on the DC was Nile Adventure, and having managed to beat all the hard level tracks fair and square, Nile Adventure absolutely stumped me back in the day. Luckily, there was a cheat code you could use to unlock everything though. If you placed well enough to enter your initials into the high score listing, entering your name as $PB unlocked every track and every boat. This code didn't work on the PC version of the game I acquired later in life though, and in that one, the first bonus stage to be unlocked was Catacomb, which was tricky to beat, but I managed to do it and then unlocked the remainder of the bonus tracks the old-fashioned way, i.e. by not cheating. Weirdly, despite the PC version of Catacomb proving quite tricky back in the day, I actually got a first place really easily when I was doing this Dreamcast capture on it. Now, just FYI, there are actually 2 different versions of the game on PC. The Eurocom version, which is the one that I've got, which is what you're currently looking at, and a separate version which came on a Midway Arcade Treasures Deluxe Edition compilation. That version is missing one of the bonus tracks, Catacomb, but it does have split screen 2-player, which the Eurocom version doesn't. Apparently it's also much harder. The graphics look a little worse, but the sound is better than the Eurocom port. Most of the video capture in this video so far has come from a Dreamcast emulator called Flycast, which has got some additional anti-aliasing and upscaling options, which really do make the game look even nicer than it did originally. I do actually still own a Dreamcast and my original copy of the game, but I don't have any way of doing decent good quality capture, so emulation is just an easier option. It's funny because in my head I never really think of there being much difference visually between the Dreamcast version and the version of the game I've got on the PC, although I do remember Nile Adventure looking a lot darker, with some extra lighting effects, which you'll actually see a bit later in the video, when I use some split screen footage to demonstrate something else. The reason I mention this here is because as I was obtaining the Flycast footage of Catacomb, I kept thinking it was just looking a bit kind of bare for some reason. So I fired the PC version back up, and sure enough Catacomb was looking a lot, well, prettier for want of a better word in that version. There are a couple of waterfalls on the track that aren't in the DC game. The water's a completely different colour, and there just seems to be some nicer lighting effects on the PC too. You can see one of the waterfalls I was talking about just coming up on the right hand screen here. Initially I did wonder if this might have been an emulation glitch of some sort, because there's also no music on the stage as well, but I actually found a video of the game running on original hardware on the Twin Galaxies site, and the waterfalls aren't present in that either. Yeah, I could have got my actual Dreamcast out to check it myself, but man, that really would have just been such a colossal effort to dig it out of storage. Now, I haven't gone through the game comparing every single little difference between the Dreamcast and PC version, but I also noticed that when I went through the Windows shortcut on Castle Von Dandy as Blowfish earlier, on the Dreamcast version, it didn't smash. I just kind of passed straight through it. But it does properly smash in the PC game. Also, on Hydro Speedway, there are noticeably more of the monorail trains going around the track in the PC game, which is the version on the right again. And again, they seem to have some slightly improved lighting effects on them, as do the buildings in the background. So although in my age-addled brain, I was picturing the PC and Dreamcast versions as being very similar, maybe the PC version is actually the version that's closest to the arcade original. Another little difference I noticed was that the stage and boat select screens also had music in them in the PC game, unlike the silent menus in the Dreamcast version. Well, apart from when you select the hard boats and tracks. So as someone that had never played the arcade game, I just always assumed that the silent menus were normal. Now I talked about the Dreamcast prototype game earlier. Whilst it's definitely a bit rougher around the edges visually than the finished Dreamcast game, something that's interesting about it is that those missing waterfalls from Catacomb make a reappearance in it. So it's kinda odd that there's something in the prototype that didn't actually make it into the finished retail version, which would have actually made it closer to the arcade game. I'm not sure if there are any other differences between the prototype and retail version like this, in terms of the actual stages themselves. It kind of reminds me a little bit of when that beta prototype version of Street Fighter 2 for the Sega Mega Drive was discovered, that actually had lovely crystal clear voice samples, versus the low quality, horrible grainy ones that actually made it into the finished game. Something else I noticed on the menu screens: Hydro Speedway and Nile Adventure are now listed as ultra hard tracks. This in itself is kinda weird. Nile Adventure, yeah, I totally get that, but Hydro Speedway is actually pretty easy. Whilst we're on the subject of Catacomb, Castle Von Dandy and Hydro Speedway, which are all 3-lap races, it's worth just mentioning that you need to play tactically here in terms of the order in which you collect the boost icons on the track, as once you pick one up, it doesn't replenish on the next laps, and your fuel tank can only hold so much boost. So if you whiz around the track collecting every boost on the first lap, you'll get into a high position quickly, but without further boost icons for the next 2 laps, you will not be able to hold on to that position, and you certainly won't catch up with the lead boats. Doing well in the game requires a certain amount of memorisation of where all the boost locations and shortcuts are in the stage, because as you progress up to the more difficult levels, you more or less need to be continually boosting in order to get first place. One of my only criticisms of the game, and it's one that didn't really affect my enjoyment of the game back in the day too much, lies with the game's incredibly rubber bandy AI. I've had weird instances where I've been really struggling to place higher than 3rd on a stage, not necessarily even on one of the actual hard tracks. This might just be on one of the medium ones too, despite using all the shortcuts and getting all the boosts. Then I'll eventually swap to a different boat and get a first place without too much trouble, with a total time that's actually a few seconds slower than the ones I was getting before, where I couldn't even catch sight of the second and first place boats. There's at least one instance I can think of a shortcut that shaves time off your total, but leaves you worse off position wise when you go through it. And it's a fucking ball ache to get at too. This shortcut is on Nile Adventure and opens up when you jump over a specific sarcophagus to get a red boost, which in turn then makes some doors open very briefly to get to a secret tunnel. I managed to do it successfully in the right hand video, but I cocked it up in the left one, and was forced to take the long way round. Despite the shortcut seemingly being a more direct route, I always end up coming out of it in a lower position than if I'd just stayed on the track normally. You can see it happen here. In the right hand video, I started off in 4th place when I went into the shortcut, but by the time I came out of it, I'd actually dropped positions and gone from 4th to 6th place. WTF? In the other video, I ignore the shortcut and get an overall longer time, but I actually ended up finishing the track in 1st rather than in 3rd like in the one where I used the shortcut. I think this is down to a peculiarity of the game's old school rubber band AI. If you stay on the track and keep the CPU boats in sight, you can eventually catch them up as long as you're constantly boosting. But if you take the shortcut, they disappear off screen, and the game seems to recalculate their positions incorrectly and puts them in front of you when you come out of the shortcut, even though, by the very nature of it being a shortcut, you should have overtaken them. Because of the rubber banding AI, getting knocked back to 6th place this late in the stage seems to make it impossible to catch up with the lead boat. In fact, if you're not in at least 5th or 4th by the end of the first jump shortcut, you may as well just give up any hope of actually coming first on Nile Adventure. It's a peculiar annoyance, but I can forgive the game for it, in view of its age and its general awesomeness in all other respects. My only 2 other minor bugbears with the game are the slightly faffy nature of how you perform the boost jump, by having to come off the boost, brake, and then boost and throttle again. I've lost count of the amount of times I've cocked this up in the past and missed a specific boost point or shortcut and ruined an otherwise fantastic lap time. The Superstar was also a bit of a ball ache to time perfectly, with you having to press and let go of the brake and throttle in sequence at the start of the game in time to the countdown. If your timing's absolutely spot on, you'll get a bonus 4 seconds of boost. If your timing's slightly off, you'll still do the Superstar, but you just won't get the boost. Although I'm moaning about it being a bit of a faff to pull off, in fairness to the game, once you've got the sequence correct in your brain about how to do it, you can normally get it working, or I can anyway, 99% of the time.
3, 2, 1, go!
But these are pretty much the only quibbles I have with the game. It kept me entertained for many years back in the day, both in single and multiplayer mode, and I still have a blast playing it today. If I ever wanted to put on a Dreamcast game to impress friends and family back in the day, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder was always my go-to. It fucking rocks. It wasn't until many years later that Hydrooooo Thuuuunder got its first sequel, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane. In the intervening years since the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder had come out, Midway had sadly gone bust, and Microsoft Studios had subsequently acquired the rights to the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder name. However, former Midway employees had gone on to form the publisher and development teams known as Raw Thrills and Specular Interactive, and they began to work on an arcade-only title that would become a spiritual successor to the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder, and a game that was, to all extents and purposes, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder 2 in everything but name. Let's just concentrate on Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane though for the time being. The original game's official sequel. When it was first released, it was an Xbox 360 exclusive title, and it was the entire reason I ended up picking up a very cheap second-hand Xbox 360 right near the end of the console's life cycle. This machine was not so much of an impulse purchase though, like the other consoles had been. I'd seen it in a local game shop, going second hand, for £70 several times before, and I'd been umming and ahhing about whether to pick up an entire system purely for this one game. Obviously I did though, because I loved the original so much. The thought of more of the same, only with better graphics, was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. The game was also available on PC, but you needed Windows 8 or higher to play it, which ruled it out as an option for me as someone that was, and still is, using Windows 7. Yes, I thought it was easier to just get a new console than to go through the hassle of updating my PC's operating system. The good thing about getting the 360 though, was that there were a couple of other Xbox exclusives I could now get my hands on, like the HD remakes of Guardian Heroes and Radiant Silvergun. Funnily enough, after I downloaded both Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane and Radiant Silvergun, once I'd got the system home, I realised that the complete cost of the system and those two games was actually still less than what I'd paid for my Saturn version of Radiant Silvergun in the first place. The one and only time I've ever splashed out on a ridiculously expensive game. As modern day sequels to an older game go, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane didn't disappoint. It really is superb. It turns the visuals of the original game up to 11, whilst managing to keep the core gameplay intact. The levels in the game included environments like a monster-inhabited island, Area 51, complete with part of the track teleporting you to an alien world, Asgard, the Bermuda Triangle and Atlantis, as well as races around the sewers of Paris. Lake Powell from the original game also makes a reappearance, albeit with a completely different track layout and look. Like the first game, some stages are long one-lap races, others need 3. Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane keeps everything that's fun about the first game, and manages to look, sound and play great into the bargain. It even, in my opinion, makes a few changes for the better, such as simplifying the way you make the ship jump, now done at the press of a button, providing you've got some boost fuel in the tank. The way you achieve the superstar at the start of a race has also been simplified now, requiring you to simply hit the throttle in time with when the announcer says go, rather than the elaborate sequence from the first game where you had to press the brake and throttle in time with the countdown. As well as the standard races, new additions were added in the form of ring races, where you have to pilot your ship through rings in order to gain boost fuel, while simultaneously avoiding the time penalty you receive for missing a ring. There are also gauntlet races, which basically involve you racing on the regular tracks, whilst trying to avoid blowing your ship up from the various crates of TNT that are scattered around them. One thing I do miss from the first game in Hurricane though, is the loss of the mighty hull ability your boat used to have, meaning you can no longer bash the CPU and NPC boats out of the way. Yes, it's great that things like the NPC boats return, complete with all their amusing sampled speech, but without the mighty hull ability there are times they do seriously get in your way and screw up things like your approach to a jump that you need to reach in order to access a shortcut. You can see the gendarmes, that's French paramilitary police to you and me, on the Paris sewers track, getting right in my fucking way and causing me to crash into the wall there. It's annoying, but it's not a deal breaker or anything. I just preferred it when you could mighty hull the pricks out the way. Your boat is also far more fragile in Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane than the original game, and has a tendency to explode if you smash into some of the trackside scenery too hard. Although you can reset it to the track pretty quickly. Sometimes though, it can feel like your boat's exploded when you barely glance something, which can be quite annoying sometimes. Although conversely, it can be pretty satisfying when you nudge a CPU tosspot into a wall or column and watch them burst into flames. Hee hee! Your boat seems to be far more liable to get upended in this game as well compared to the original. A slight scrape of a wall as you hit a bit of chop in the water that launches you into the air, and the next thing you know your boat's back to front, nose down in the water, with its arse sticking up in the air. If you're coming off a particularly long jump though, sometimes you can actually correct your boat's wonky positioning before you hit the water.
This is gonna hurt.
Which is always nice and satisfying. Another change from the first game, this one a good one, is the ability to draft the other boats. This means you can navigate your way through their wake, and this will give you a speed boost. These differences might be explainable by the fact that Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane did not start life as a Hydrooooo Thuuuunder franchise title. Vector Unit, the game's developers, had originally been developing their own speedboat racing game based on an original IP, and after 6 months a working prototype was pitched to several publishers, one of whom included Microsoft Studios. They suggested that with a few tweaks, Vector Unit's game would make an awesome Hydrooooo Thuuuunder sequel. So that's exactly what they did. And Microsoft Studios acquired the rights to the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder name shortly before Midway Games went bankrupt and was bought by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment. Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane then went on to be released as a digital-only download in 2010 on Xbox Live Arcade. Vector Unit released some DLC for the game called the Tempest Pack. which added 3 additional circuits to the game's original roster, each with race, ringmaster and gauntlet game types, and 2 new boats were included, Whiplash and Cyclone. Each of the boats in the game has multiple different skins that can be unlocked in the game through completing various different achievements, such as finishing first on certain stages, completing a certain ring race or gauntlet challenge, or by finding all the hidden packages, of which there are 10 on each stage. Just like the first game, blue and red booster pods give you fuel, and the stages and boats in the game are unlocked incrementally the more you play it, this time by reaching certain levels of XP. Also, just like the first game, the boats are divided up into beginner, medium and expert categories, with the expert ones once again being the fastest and hardest to control, and some boats being better at jumping and air control than others. Once again, Thresher and Tidal Blade are my boys. When it comes to the expert boats, I still do love Cutthroat, but the new DLC Whiplash boat has actually superseded it as my favourite in that category. It's just got such a cool body design, and it actually handles pretty well once you get used to it. Although the later tracks you unlock definitely seem to get a bit harder than the initial ones, it's actually your choice of boat that'll dictate the difficulty of the CPU opponents, with more XP getting dished out for coming first, second or third in the expert races compared to the normal and easy ones. The difficulty is also reflected in the Gauntlet and Ringmaster events, with more TNT and smaller and harder to get to rings on the track. And I'm sorry, but Ringmaster does so sound like the sort of specialist video title you might find in your local adult entertainment emporium. Difficulty wise, I would say the game is pitched just right, especially in the races. Practice makes perfect, and before long you'll be getting first place on those expert courses. The Ringmaster and Gauntlet events though can fuck right off. Once all the standard boats have been unlocked, you can go on to further unlock upgraded versions of all the easy and medium boats called the X series, which have improved stats that brings them up to the same level as the expert boats, which come with all their alternative skins pre-unlocked. One thing that annoyed me slightly was that despite paying separately for the Tempest Pack DLC boats and stages, you still actually had to unlock them in the game itself. Are you taking the piss, Vector Unit? If I paid separately for something in a game, I want instant access to it, for flip's sake. Visually, Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane is running at 30 frames per second on the original Xbox, and I think it's 720p, but I could be wrong about that. The PC version though managed to run at 60 frames per second, but I've heard that its visuals are slightly cut back in other regards compared to the 360 game. I couldn't tell you exactly how though. PC owners also got the Tempest Pack DLC included as a standard, which is another definite bonus for them. Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane is also backwards compatible with the Xbox Series X, which can upscale the game into 4K and also increases the frame rate from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second. Wowzers, that sounds like a massive improvement. The music in the game is a bit bland and forgettable though, and you don't have specific stage music like in the first game. To be honest, the music in the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder didn't exactly make a lasting impression on me either. Do you know what? Let's just pause the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane talk here just for a second. Because on reflection, I think I'm probably being a little bit overly harsh on the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder's soundtrack here. There's definitely something earnest and almost a bit James Horner-esque about a lot of the tunes in the game. And thematically, they do suit their individual stages well, in an almost cinematic kind of way. The Greek Isles theme tune is particularly catchy, and I must admit it's been going round in my head for the last couple of days, after I recorded a little bit of extra footage for the video. Let's just have a very quick listen to it now, and then we'll get back to Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane. Alright, that's enough of that little interruption. Let's get back to Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane. The music in Hurricane isn't bad per se, but it just plays randomly in the background and doesn't really make much of a lasting impression. There is one particular tune I really like though, called In the Draft. Let's just hear a quick bit of that now. One thing I think is definitely worth mentioning is just what an excellent job Vector Unit did in Hurricane, and not only creating some totally outlandish environments to rival the first games, but also packing them with lots of equally crazy stuff going on within them. Like the yokels in the biplane dropping explosive barrels on you in Lake Powell, or the actual monsters in Monster Island, the UFOs in Area 51, and what looks like a giant Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird taking off above you at one point, and the alien landscape you get teleported to at the end of the stage. There's also a gigantic Thor, or possibly Odin, appearing and storming Asgard, and there's an active erupting volcano on Atlantis that sprays the track with debris, which actually opens up a shortcut on the second lap.
Hey, I didn't sign up for this.
I love all the little comments from your co-pilot in this game. If you do particularly well in a race, he'll normally congratulate you. If you do particularly badly, he'll tend to berate you, usually with a sarcastic put-down of some sort. I love all these little touches in the game. It's something, along with those aforementioned visual flourishes I was just talking about, that really helps to give the game a bit of character. And on top of all the other things I've already mentioned, you've also got the general weirdness of Bermuda Triangle, complete with the open section of choppy sea that you have to race on, which is a really nice touch, together with its freaky section of track with islands that just float in the middle of the air, with water that flows the wrong way on them.
We've got boost. No, this is gonna hurt.
The game also gets kudos for the inclusion of a full player split screen option, something that seems to be an afterthought in so many modern games these days. The multiplayer also gives you access to an additional boat you can't access in single player, a massive rubber ducky. You can also do online races using Xbox Live, but as I'm only a silver Xbox Live person and not a gold member, I've never actually taken part in one. There are a few of the ship skins that have got an unlock requirement that requires winning in an online race, so that's a minor annoyance that I can't access those. So on the whole, I absolutely love Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane, despite a few very minor quibbles. It looks great and it plays great too. And despite a few minor gameplay differences, it does a fantastic job of evoking the spirit of the original game. Especially in the way Vector Unit have wholeheartedly embraced the craziness of the first Hydrooooo Thuuuunder. But how does it hold up to H2Overdrive then, the spiritual sequel to Hydrooooo Thuuunder, created by a lot of the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder team? And how does H2Overdrive itself hold up next to the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder? Let's find out. Okay, just one very quick interlude before we get to H2 Overdrive. It's worth just mentioning that on the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder wiki page, it mentions that plans are afoot at Midway for an actual Hydrooooo Thuuuunder 2, and goes so far as to mention a few ideas for track names that were apparently bandied about before its cancellation, some of which seem very familiar from Hurricane. There's also mention of a track called Revenge of the Nile. This is a name for a stage which will come up again as we progress into the H2 Overdrive section of the video, so just keep it locked away in the forefront of your consciousness there, ready to be retrieved at a moment's notice. The Hydrooooo Thuuuunder wiki page also has some supposed artwork of how the redesigned boats would have looked in Hydrooooo Thuuuunder 2. I've no idea about the validity of these claims or the artwork, as I suppose someone with an interest in the game could have just as easily knocked them up in Photoshop. But they do certainly look the part as far as natural evolutions of the boats in the original game go. I probably ought to just mention as well, although Midway themselves didn't actually create any sequels to Hydrooooo Thuuuunder unfortunately, the game is considered as part of their Thunder series of racing titles, which also includes Off-Road Thunder, Four-Wheel Thunder and Arctic Thunder. Anyway, interlude over, let's get on to H2 Overdrive. So as we mentioned earlier, H2 Overdrive was developed by Specular Interactive, which consisted of former Midway employees, including original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder creator Steve Rank, and was published by Raw Thrills in 2009. I only ever saw an H2 Overdrive arcade cabinet once out in the wild in a cinema foyer, but due to the company I was with and time constraints I wasn't able to play it, and after that I never saw one ever again. The cabinet was able to support multiplayer link play with a maximum of, I think, 4 players. I'd always hoped it'd get a home port one day, but sadly that never happened. However, about 3 years ago, around the Christmassy period, the arcade version got cracked and made playable on PC. In fact, you could play it using one of either 2 different arcade loaders, TechnoParrot or JConfig. So yeah, that was a nice little Christmas present in 2019. H2 Overdrive actually plays a lot more similarly to the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder than Hurricane does. The basic gameplay is unchanged from the original. Pick a stage, pick an easy, medium or hard level boat, drive through booster icons as you play, win the race. H2 Overdrive also has a load of other collectibles you can smash your way through. There's something that looks a bit like a box with a sword on it, which adds time to your boost when you smash them. There are now gold super boost icons you can collect, which set your boost meter alight and turbocharge your boost even further, making your ship go even faster, as well as keeping the boost itself ticking over for a bit longer. The most dramatic box you can smash is the one known as the Hull Crusher, which surrounds you with a ring of fire that takes out any CPU player foolish enough to drift into your radius, and it's pretty awesome to behold. There are boxes with mines you can smash through to mine the opposition boats, or yourself if you're not careful. There are also buoys you can break as well, that give you bonus boost and explode as you play through them. Yeah, I know the game pronounces it buoy, but it's wrong, you call them buoys for God's sake. You need to be boosting in order to smash the boxes and buoys, otherwise they'll just harmlessly bounce off your hull. The mighty hull ability from the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder makes a comeback here, meaning if you're boosting you can smash the other CPU players out of the way. This was one of my biggest bugbears about Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane, so it's great to see it making a return in this game. The way you perform the Hydro Jump in H2 Overdrive is also identical to the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder. Stop throttling forward, brake, then hit boost. The way you do the superstart is identical too. Throttle back at the start of the countdown, then forward, then back, then forward again, in time with the 3, 2, 1 go. If you get it right, as you hit the go, the game will say superstart, and you'll begin the race with boost power.
3, 2, 1, go, go, go!
Superstar. Boost mode.
I do prefer the simplified Superstart version in Hurricane that's just done with a single button press in time with the go, but I think the timing needed to do the Superstart feels a little bit more forgiving in H2Overdrive than it did in the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder. Just like the other games, you must have some boost fuel in your tank in order to do the hydro jump. H2Overdrive also adds in a new feature allowing you to perform stunts for boost if you hit a ramp. The stunts are performed in the exact same way as the hydro jump. I believe the game was fully intended to be Hydrooooo Thuuunder 2 before Midway went bankrupt, rather than the spiritual successor that it later became. There's a definite similarity in some of the boat's designs in H2Overdrive and compared to the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder, and by association Hurricane. Sea Devil, for example, is a dead ringer for Banshee. Thunderblade is Tidal Blade. I think Little Kahuna might be Thresher with a pink paint job. Dead Reckoner is Cutthroat, and Atomic Avenger is Rad Hazard. Some of the levels are thematically very similar to some of the ones from the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder 2. That's 2 T-O-O, not the number 2. Temple of Flume has a bit of a combined Nile Adventure Lost Island vibe to it. Quake Canyon looks like a successor to Lake Powell. And let's just take a second here to appreciate the effect of the dam bursting followed by the very high jump you get straight afterwards. Whee! Splosh! Moving on. And a bit more obviously, Hong Kong Buoy, great name by the way, even if they are pronouncing Boy wrong, and Frozen Tundra are like the Far East and Arctic Circle. Even the checkpoints you go through on the courses look very similar, if not identical, to the ones from Hydrooooo Thuuunder. The game even does the "you're crazy" thing if you select one of the hard tracks as well, just like the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder. And speaking of the hard tracks, being a UK person like what I am, I love the fact there's a London Underground level too, with a race on the River Thames that takes in a lot of the landmarks you'd see on it, like Tower Bridge, the Thames Barrage, and the Millennium Stadium, or O2 Stadium, or whatever it's called now, before the track eventually snakes its way under the city and follows what looks like a flooded section of the London Underground itself. In this respect, I suppose this track's kinda similar to New York Disaster, which at one point saw you racing through a flooded New York subway station. The stages in H2Overdrive are a bit more grounded in reality than some of the more fantastical ones from Hydrooooo Thuuunder Hurricane, like Area 51 and Atlantis, but they are no less grandiose, with lots of really high jumps and visual spectacle going on, like the exploding dam we already saw in Quake Canyon, and the forest fire area that you go through in Wild America. I've no idea what type of hardware the original arcade cabinet was packing, only that it was a PC, running some form of Linux, or how it stacks up next to the Xbox 360. But H2Overdrive is definitely the nicer looking game of the two in my opinion. It runs at 60 frames per second compared to Xbox Hurricane's 30, and I think the overall look of the graphics are just generally a bit brighter, crisper and bolder compared to the slightly more muted hues of Hurricane. In fairness to Hurricane though, the Xbox 360's 30 frames per second never felt slow or especially chuggy to me. And, as I mentioned earlier, there are ways to play Hurricane at 60 frames per second now, and in higher resolution. The music in H2Overdrive is equally as unmemorable as Hydrooooo Thuuunder Hurricanes though. It's not bad music as such, it's just kind of, you know, there in the background and not something that I particularly could ever remember after I played the track. The game actually has a levelling up system. It was possible to create a profile using a keypad on the arcade cabinet itself, so the game could track your progress as you played through it, and levelled up your boats. Once you have all 3 boats of any category at level 40, you can access a bonus boat from that category. Once this is accomplished, you just have to highlight the middle boat of that category and push the view button twice until the bonus boat appears. A single press of the view button gives you the option to play a solid gold version of any of the boats. This doesn't change your stats, but I guess if you're into bling this might be up your street. You can get gold versions of the bonus boats too. 2 of the stages can be played in reverse, Down Under Drive and Frozen Tundra. On the selection screen, just highlight either course and press the view select button. If done correctly, the game will actually say backwards and a backwards icon will appear next to it. A nice touch here is that you play the reverse versions of the stages at a different time of day to the forwards versions. So Down Under Drive is now at night and Frozen Tundra is now in the daytime. Like the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder, there are some bits of unused levels that you can access in the game with a bit of ROM hackery. There are 6 stages in total. Keeping that original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder vibe going, one of the unused stages was going to be called Revenge of the Nile, a name that was actually used for a stage in another Raw Thrills game, Dirty Driving. There are also a few unused songs and a whole heap of speech samples in there too. If you want to find out more, head over to the Cutting Room Floor website, where you can see some videos of the unused tracks and listen to the songs. I'll add a link to the video description. As an arcade crack, it's actually possible to play the game with a racing wheel with force feedback working, which is pretty cool, courtesy of Boomslang's FFB plugin. This means the wheel isn't just shaking when you collide with walls and other boats. There's also a sensation of torque as you turn the wheel, as though the boats are actively fighting back against you. As cool as this is though, I must admit I tend to generally stick to an Xbox 360 pad for this game. It just feels more comfortable for boosting purposes, as using the full range of the wheel whilst trying to keep a button pressed down can get a bit uncomfortable. I did actually give the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder on PC a try with my old racing wheel many years ago. It actually played surprisingly well like that, even though the X-axis presumably hadn't in any way, shape or form been optimised for wheels versus a joypad's analogue thumbstick. Picking a favourite out of H2Overdrive and Hydrooooo Thuuuunder Hurricane is a tough decision. As I've already mentioned, I think H2Overdrive has just got a slight edge visually, just because I prefer its more obviously arcade-like bright and colourful graphics and faster frame rate. But Hurricane is really no slouch in the looks department either. Unrelated to the frame rate, I think H2Overdrive has just got a slightly better sense of speed too. The gameplay definitely feels a bit more faster paced. I'm not sure if there's an option to change the difficulty in H2Overdrive. There probably is something in one of the game's INI files or test menu you could alter, but I've never tried investigating this further to be honest. But at the default difficulty setting I've been playing it on, it's definitely the easier of the two games. I've managed to get into first and second place on all the stages with very little difficulty, often on my very first ever playthrough of that stage. Very different to the old school difficulty of the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder. Like Hurricane, some of the courses are 1-lap races in H2Overdrive, others are longer 1 single lap races. Whereas in Hurricane, some of the laps will actually change a little bit as you progress through them, due to other areas of the stage opening up, like in Atlantis and Monster Island, the 3 laps in H2Overdrive don't alter. The single lap races in Hurricane tend to be a little bit longer too. Just like in Hurricane and the original Hydrooooo Thuuuunder, there are also shortcuts you can take on the tracks as well, which normally open up a small part of a secret area and will shave a few precious seconds off your final time. Gameplay wise, this is again where it's difficult to pick a favourite. I think I do generally prefer the sturdier feel of the boats in H2Overdrive, that, once you've got some boost in the fuel tank, feel more like aquatic wrecking balls that just plough through the opposition, as opposed to the more fragile and flimsy feel of the ones in Hurricane, that sometimes feel like they're held together with bits of balsa wood and nitroglycerine. The Mighty Hull ability also means that the CPU opponents and NPC boats don't get in your way when you're on the approach to a jump or a shortcut, something that can and does happen often in Hurricane. However, there could be an argument that getting rid of the Mighty Hull ramming ability and adding more waves and water effects makes Hurricane take more skill, and just makes it feel more rewarding to win. I think Hurricane does have more rewarding long-term gameplay from this point of view, as memorisation of the locations of the boost pickups and all the shortcuts through the tracks help you shave seconds off your total times and eventually get those first place wins using the expert boats. I think part of this may well be down to the differences in the games in terms of Hurricane being specifically developed for the home market and H2Overdrive being an arcade title. The additional wave and water effects, essentially adding more chop to the water, does add a bit of an element of unpredictability to proceedings in Hurricane though, which can sometimes get a bit frustrating when combined with the flimsy aspects of its boats. For example, when you've just hit the water after a huge mega long drop from a high jump, and then an otherwise totally unassuming looking wave suddenly launches you unexpectedly back into the air another 50 feet, straight into a low hanging part of scenery on the ceiling, which suddenly turns your boat into a fireball. As mentioned earlier, it's pretty easy to reset yourself to the track, but when that crash, which felt totally out of your hands to avoid, suddenly costs you the difference between first and fourth place, it can get annoying. The wave physics can also make some of the ring races in Hurricane a pain in the arse to complete too. I was trying to complete the Pro Bermuda Triangle ring race a while back to unlock a specific ship skin, and the unpredictable waves in the open sea area would very occasionally result in a ring being submerged as I approached it, or, more often, a big wave would launch me straight over the top of one when I had an otherwise straight approach to it. Whilst this may sound like a minor annoyance, it starts to get infuriating when it's happening for like the 50th time and you lose all your boost and get a time penalty, resulting in missing out on that gold medal once again by just a few seconds. Although it sounds like I'm really sticking the boot into Hurricane now, don't get me wrong, I do love the game and definitely feel it was worth picking up the cheap Xbox 360 for. In a recent-ish video I made, I was talking about modern arcade ports, and I focused a lot on Raw Thrill's recent home port of Cruise and Blast, and how I was a big fan of the fact it had extra stages and content added to it for its home port. If Raw Thrills ever decide to do the same with H2Overdrive and release an enhanced home port with some extra boats and stages, I'd snap up a copy of it in an instant. Overall then, as much as I love Hurricane, I think H2Overdrive just nudges it out the top spot for me, in terms of which is the better follow-on to the original Hydrooooo Thuuunder. It's funny that an unofficial spiritual sequel is actually a more faithful follow-up to the original game than the officially licensed sequel, but I guess it's not really that surprising when you consider the team behind it. That's not to take anything away from Hydrooooo Thuuunder Hurricane though. I still think it's an absolutely fantastic game that plays brilliantly, and that Vector Unit did an absolutely marvellous job of capturing the spirit of the original. It's just that I prefer the fact that H2Overdrive actually feels more like the original game. But honestly though, why pick a favourite when you can just play both? Winner winner, Hydrooooo Thuuunder dinner. In terms of additional sequels, a further Hydrooooo Thuuunder game was developed by a team called Pixelbyte Games, called Hydrooooo Thuuunder Go, which was only ever playable on Windows phones. Are Windows phones even a thing anymore? No idea. I've only ever seen footage of this one in YouTube videos. It actually looks pretty cool, like a slightly visually pared back version of Hurricane. It's a shame Microsoft decided to never release it on any other platforms. I must look into whether it's possible to try and emulate a Windows phone to give it a try at some point. That's it in terms of further Hydrooooo Thuuunder games. Go was officially the last in the series. Although Microsoft hasn't done anything else with the Hydrooooo Thuuunder license, that hasn't stopped Vector Unit though from continuing to produce some excellent original IP aquatic races of their own, called the Riptide GP series. The Riptide series started off on mobile devices before making the jump to home consoles a while back, and I picked up Riptide GP2 and Riptide GP Renegade, number 3 in the series, as digital downloads a while back in a PSN sale for £9 for the pair, so bargain. The Riptide games are futuristic jet ski racers. That's right motherfuckers, we're doing our aquatic games in the future now, like Wipeout or F-Zero with waves. Yeah boy. And they really do feel like yet another spiritual Hydrooooo Thuuunder pseudo-sequel, only in this case it's more like a spiritual sequel to Hurricane. particularly Renegade, with all sorts of crazy and outlandish track elements going on, like a race that goes on through a burning forest. There's also some pretty gnarly wave physics in there as well, allowing you to catch some pretty big air, whilst racing through that Hydrooooo Thuuuunder staple, the devastated future apocalyptic city that's flooded. Awesome stuff. You even get some tracks which have got a couple of NPC characters to get in your way as well, like some futuristic jet ski Robocops. Again, this really helps to give this game that sort of slightly Hydrooooo Thuuuunder-esque vibe. Both of the Riptide games benefit from running on more advanced hardware than my old 360, in this case my PS4, and they both run at 60 frames per second. Considering their mobile device origins, they really do look pretty nice, with some nice big and detailed playable characters and vehicles, and detailed tracks that go beyond just being boring race circuits with lots of interesting things happening on them. Both games have also got pretty excellent dancey soundtracks, with Renegade in particular having a couple of absolutely banging drum and bass tunes in it. Here's one of my favourites. Anyway, I'm not going to go into tons of detail about them here, other than the emphasis being on performing stunts of boost in these games, rather than collecting boost power-ups. Suffice to say, if you love Hydrooooo Thuuuunder, I think you'll love these games too. And there we have it. I mean, who wouldn't love Hydrooooo Thuuuunder? What's not to love about racing fast, brightly coloured powerboats through exotic and frequently bonkers locations? I know I certainly do, and I have done for over 20 years now. I just wish Microsoft would allow Vector Unit, or even Raw Thrills themselves, to have another crack of the whip. It would be great to see a new Hydrooooo Thuuuunder game come out, with the benefit of modern PC and console technology. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up there. Were you a fan of the series? If you've made it far enough through the video to hear me say that, then I'm guessing that's probably a yes? Let me know about your thoughts and experiences with the Hydrooooo Thuuuunder games in the comments below. Anyway, I started off this video talking about moving to Australia to work for a year. It seems only fitting in that case that we actually finish on a race set in Australia then. Catch you later, you flaming drongos.
Hydrooooo Thuuuunder!
Hello there, auto buddies. It's your old pal Wheeljack here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to be an Optimus Prime and not a Negatron by making sure you hit the like button and also subscribing. We'll hopefully see you again real soon for another exciting adventure with Mr. Thunderwing.